Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Boy, this is a lot of people. I'm Diana Bain. I'm the president of the Middlebury AAUW branch, and this speakers conference or event is the first of our 2025 and 2026 events, which one in November, and then you have 4 more in the spring. And if you would like to be on the list for those, be sure to put your email address on the sign-in sheet. Please, everybody sign in so we have some idea of how many people came. AAUW is the American Association of University Women. It's open to male and female, so please join if you would like to. It was started in 1881, and they gave out almost 30 million dollars worth of fellowships and scholarships from 2020 to 2025. Their purpose is to serve women and girls education with scholarships and fellowships. And now I'm going to turn it over to Judy to introduce our speakers once we figure out how to change it.
Maybe I can just be near that. Okay, let's see.
Hello?
Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here for what promises to be a truly meaningful event. Today, we're honored to welcome John Vincent, a retired police officer, poet, and founder of a revolutionary press, who will share how he's amplifying the voices of incarcerated writers and artists. Joining him is Heather Newcomb, whose work at Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility and Vermont Works for Women helped bring these powerful stories and artworks to the public eye. Together, John and Heather have created an exhibition that celebrates creativity, resilience, and hope. You'll have the chance to view the artwork, hear the stories behind it, and take home resources to learn more. We hope that you leave feeling enlightened, moved, and inspired by the courage and creativity on display. Please join me in welcoming John Vincent and Heather Newcomb.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you very much. Thanks to the artists whose work is on the wall, and they're not here. So let's honor them and celebrate their work surrounding us in this setting, and they'll bear witness to the conversations that we had. And I also want to thank the Department of Corrections in Vermont. I call them a collaborator with us. I'm not an adversary with the Department of Corrections. And I'm thankful that they hold the keys and open the door for us to come in and visit with and work with and make art with the men and women in the prisons in Vermont. And I also want to thank you for having us here and the AAUW and Middlebury College, of course. So a revolutionary press, everybody has a piece of paper there to tell you about the press. So I'll skip way beyond that. I won't talk to you about the press. When I started it, it was printing mostly war, peace, social justice. I found myself also printing people who had been incarcerated. Let me share a few of those with you. So just pass those around. You might find reading these more interesting than listening to me. So just keep circulating them around. And there's one more that I left out. You recognize some of the names. You won't recognize other of the names. And now all of a sudden I realized that was a theme. Not intentional, but that's what happened. And that was the first one was printed in 2011. A quote of Herman Wallace. You see it coming around. 10 or 12 years later, in the fall of 2022, a teaching artist from the Maine Department of Corrections facilities also is a Maine College in Art and Design instructor. She contacted me and said, "You do a lot of great work with the press. Do you think you could create some broadsides, collaborate with some of the men in the Maine State Prison? We're going to have an exhibit of their artwork, and we think it would be really neat to have letterpress." So I said, yes, we can do that. And that ended up having a collaboration of work between the press remotely, but I was also able to contact some of the men in the prison. They actually have email, and I can email people in the Maine State Prison. You can't do that in Vermont, but you can do it in Maine. So I was able to directly connect with some of the artists and say, well, how would you like this piece designed since you can't be here in the print shop? I can do that part of it. And there was an exhibit that traveled around in Maine with some of that artwork and other original artwork that came from the prison. So as you go down that list of resources, you can follow down and see that there's an exhibit there, and you can actually look at the exhibit online, it's still up. With that, I was also introduced to Catherine Dustman at Colby College, the founder of the Freedom and Captivity Initiative. I would really recommend you looking that up. I've left that information on the resource list. And I will read to you what their initiative is. And the reason I'm doing that is this is Colby College in Maine, and they've been doing this for a number of years. We have nothing similar to that in Vermont, and I would love to see that happen. It's going to take people to make that happen. So the Freedom and Captivity Initiative is a statewide public humanities initiative beginning in fall 2021, running still, to bring critical perspectives from the humanities to the interrogation of incarceration, recognizing that mass incarceration is fueled by racism and profit-generating mechanisms that tear apart communities and families. The project offers opportunities for public engagement about imagining prison abolition and the redirection of resources towards community investments, the repair of racial and gender injustice, intergenerational trauma, and elder care for the aging population in Maine's prisons, same in Vermont. The project, which includes art exhibitions, workshops, webinars, podcasts, research, and creative production, public education materials, and linked courses taught across Maine's campuses, aims to cultivate opportunities for imagining freedom in an abolitionist society. The project is conceived with participation of people in Maine directly impacted by the carceral system. We are all impacted by the carceral system, regardless of whether or not you've ever been arrested, or your family has been arrested, or you've been a survivor of a violent crime, or you're a taxpayer and you're paying $198 million a year to Vermont to house 2,100 people in prisons. That's not money well spent at the moment. Through that initiative in Colby College, I was able to attend 2 13-week courses facilitated by men and women in the Maine State Prison over the computer. Quite phenomenal. It was also the best conversations I've ever had in a group setting. And I met some of the artists whose work I had created in the print shop, and I was able to talk with them about all sorts of issues around trauma, healing, and forgiveness. In fact, I met Leo Hilton. His information's on that resource list. He's also known as the prison professor. You can look him up at Mother Jones and find out how he teaches through Colby College as a professor. He was not a professor when he went to college, or went to prison when he was 18. He didn't even have his high school diploma. He's now working on a doctorate degree with the George Mason University. But he also teaches through Colby College 2 college courses at Colby from his prison cell. In the one class that we took together was Journeys of Trauma, Healing, and Forgiveness, and I met Doug. Doug is, actually it's Doug Gilden. In Maine, it's okay to use first name, last name. Vermont, we're not allowed to do that. You'll see all the artwork here, it's just initials. Doug suggested that in his trauma, healing, and forgiveness, he said we forgive, we heal, we grow. And that became kind of a subtitle of the exhibit that you're now looking at. So from all of that, I thought, well, why am I doing all this in Maine and I live in Vermont? There's Vermont prisons here. What's going on in Vermont prisons around art and exhibits? And I found not much. So I thought, well, why not have one? And about that time, the Rokeby Museum had an opening for, this was 2023, they had an opening for an exhibit, and I proposed that I obtain art from Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont, and have it as an exhibit, much like they do in the state of Maine. We weren't able to get artwork from New Hampshire, but we did from the other 3 states. And that was at the exhibit was at Rokeby for 2.5 months. And at that point, Heather and I decided it needed to travel elsewhere. So it's been on the road ever since, and it's been mostly through public libraries. We intend to travel it until at least the end of 2026. Last year, I was invited into the Tuesday afternoon poetry group at the Southern State Correctional Facility. There's a teaching facilitator. She does not call herself a teaching artist, but she writes poetry, she knows poetry. She's worked in prisons in Georgia. She moved to Maine, she moved to Vermont, and wanted to do the same thing up in this part of the country. So she got to the Southern State Correctional Facility, and every Tuesday she meets with 12 to 20 men in a poetry session. And they were interested in printing their poetry like people do on the outside, but they have no facility to do that. They have very limited access to any computer screens or anything digital, so they handwrite a lot of it. I like the fact they do that. But I also have the letterpress, and I proposed that we bring the letterpress in, if it was allowed, through the Department of Corrections, and they did. In fact, they bring 2 printing presses in. And the men design, we work together on the design of the artwork. I take all the notes from them, I take it back to the print shop, and I set it up the way that they've asked me to do it, the color paper, the type of text, where the image is going to be. So they have complete control over the design. The first piece they wanted to do for the exhibit was none of their own work, but Will, and I can use Will's name because he's no longer with us. Will died in his prison cell in Southern State Correctional Facility last January. He was an endeared member of this poetry group, and they wanted to remember him by printing one of his poems because they knew it was going to go into an exhibit. So they didn't want any of their work to go into the exhibit. They wanted his work to do it. So one of the other men created a drawing that Zoe Eager, who was a Middlebury student last year, she carved a linoleum block, and that's actually up here, and this printing press right here. And she carved the image from the drawing of the pocket watch that went with this print. So then that print was made. But most interesting is that I borrowed a technique from the Peace Paper Project or the Combat Paper Project that works with military veterans in shredding their uniforms and turning it into paper and creating artwork about lived experience in the military. I thought, well, we could certainly do that. I got access to prison uniforms, which I didn't think I was going to, but the Southern State Correctional Facility volunteer coordinator said, how much do you need? So we obtained prison uniforms from the men who are in this poetry class, including towels, sheets, bedding, anything that has fiber in it that can be turned into paper. So the paper on the wall over there, it's the 4th print as you come in the door. It's mounted on the grade. It has the pocket watch. That is paper made by the men themselves, using the material from their lived experience in the prison, making the handmade paper. I brought it home, dried it, and the next week we came down and we printed on this press and a second press that print. And that's the first time that's been done in Vermont that I know of. Then they wanted to do a second project, which was called coffee carts. And this was their own work, small prints, that could be put into the inmate-run coffee shop at the Southern State Correctional Facility. You could look that up. I've left it on the resource list. There's a link to a news article. Pretty fascinating to find out about it. I understand the Department of Corrections would like to do that in other facilities if it's allowed. Their idea there with those cards was they didn't want them for themselves. They wanted them to be distributed in this coffee house in the prison. So other men who did not have the privilege of coming to this poetry class could also share in the artwork. And it's a postcard, and they intended to have it as a postcard because they know that's a lot easier to mail it out of the prison. It's cheaper. It isn't going to be censored as much as a letter is. So then they can send that home to their family and friends, and they have a little idea about what they might be doing in prison. So they're not sitting around talking about the next crime, they're talking about poetry and what they've written. It's very powerful to sit in the poetry classes. There's tears, there's laughter, there's a lot of camaraderie, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to do that. And the third project the press is collaborating with them is the cover and artwork and letterpress of their second chapbook that they're producing. The first one is in the exhibit here somewhere.
At the door.
Yeah, at the door. And we'll, hopefully before this exhibit runs past here in November, the second one will be here. They've also done in pages in the book. They've also made the paper for that too in the prison. And then we have the art from Guantanamo. And I'm not an expert about the art from Guantanamo, but I've left you with two resources. One of them is a digital reprint of the book that's here on the counter right at the door, Art from Guantanamo. It's beautiful. I would look it up online. There's also a video. You can watch one of the men, or it's a simulation of one of the men building a model ship in Guantanamo. A lot of the artwork is destroyed, never was allowed to leave. The military did allow a lot of it to leave through the attorneys that were representing the men in the prison. And before I talk about the art any more about that, I think we should have a conversation about what the hell are we doing? Military prison in Cuba. So why art from incarceration? And I would go to somebody else to tell about that, Nicole Fleetwood, whose book, Marking Time. Incarceration, well, let's see. Americans' prisons are filled with art. Despite the isolation and degrading conditions, the incarcerated are driven to assert their humanity in the face of a system that dehumanizes them. They often turn ordinary objects into elaborate works of art, working with meager supplies and in the harshest conditions, including solitary confinement. These artists find ways to resist the brutality and depravity that prisons engender. The impact of their art can be felt far beyond prison walls. Their bold works have opened new possibilities in American art. As the movement to reform the country's criminal justice system grows, art provides the prison with a political voice. Their works testify to the economic and racial injustices that underpin Americans' punishment and offers a new vision of freedom for the 21st century. That's an academic writing. Why do people create art in personal spaces? It opens up new realities. It humanizes. It allows someone who has learned to think of themselves and their environment as negative to view their lives differently. Inside, artist communities are in solidarity with one another and it can be a way for them to come together and express themselves in ways the power structure can do nothing about. Dominique Merritt, who's incarcerated in Virginia, wrote, and you can read this, whoever's got that little blue card, "They don't own me when I'm working on my art." And that demonstrates that you can lock up the person, but you can't lock up their spirit. Art in the prison also shows the creative power is available to us all, even one confined behind bars, fences, and barbed wire. Betty Knight, an incarcerated artist in Maryland, whose work was in the original exhibit. I wish we still had it. Here we sent back. Eddie says, make positive time behind the barbed wire. It's about healing, healing from one's own experience of trauma and the trauma of causing harm to others. It allows for an opening up to the act of forgiveness to themselves and to others. As one of the artists in this exhibit wrote, and her book is here, it's the orange book.
Over on the pedestal there.
Over there.
Yep.
In that, she wrote, forgiveness is a virtue of the brave and fearless. And it speaks to positive growth. Doug, currently incarcerated in Maine, said, we heal, we forgive, we grow. And the response by Allison, formerly incarcerated in Vermont, when asked if you could imagine a landscape without prisons, her reply, it would be a landscape with no barriers to positive change. So why so many references to me? It's not happening in Vermont. It's going to take some of us to do that. I'm constantly being asked to come onto the Maine with the printing presses and go into the prisons.
Excuse
I
me,
don't get that in every response
could you
to them.
hold the microphone up to your
Oh,
mouth?
sure, yeah.
Some of us have hearing loss, they can't hear you.
Thank you. So I don't get all those requests from the Department of Corrections in Vermont. I do go to Southern State. I have been to the Chipton Regional Facility for the women, but it's been hard, if not almost impossible, to go in and work with other incarcerated individuals in Vermont. I could go on. Heather. I was going to tell you more about it.
Thank you, John, so much. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's a wonderful turnout, and I get the pleasure of sharing about working with these women. I have worked with them for the past 8 years at Chipman Regional Correctional Facility. And when I started 8 years ago, I taught one class, one afternoon a week, called Build Your Skills. But I realized they needed so much more. And through the contract between Department of Corrections and Vermont Works for Women, I was able to expand the programming and open up the Career Resource and Reentry Center at Chittenden Regional Correctional Center. And myself and a colleague are now there 5 days a week. Well, she's there. I'm back to community-based work on the reentry side. But in the 8 years, I had the pleasure of working with many of these women and just seeing the incredible talent that is locked up in our prisons. And when women are in prison, most likely it's because every other safety net in our society has failed these women, and they end up in incarceration. They are there because they're poor and can't afford adequate counsel. They're there because of toxic relationships. They're there because of bad love is better than no love to them. Some of this art was started during COVID because they were on complete lockdown in COVID, and us contractors were locked out for 9 months. And they were locked in on their living units. The meals were brought to their living units. They were on their living units 24/7. But art brings them together. In the day room, to see 5 or 6 women around a table, all making art together, or all crocheting, is just incredible to see. Those relationships that they build. They oftentimes make art for each other. This shawl that I'm wearing was made by one of the artists who also produced all this work in this cabinet here. Because I worked with them for so long, I built relationships with them. And last year, I got married to my longtime partner, and the women were so happy for me. And one artist crocheted my wedding bouquet of sunflowers. And what's amazing about this, like John said, the creativity of their art and the materials they use, the sticks for the stems are from corn dogs that they had for dinner one night. And she went around and collected the sticks to use for the stems of the wedding bouquet. She also knit me this pouch for my dollar dance. So even though they may be locked away from us, and as much as I think of Department of Corrections as a partner, because it takes collaboration to reach these women, Department of Corrections is the gatekeeper, and they make you jump through a lot of hoops before you can get in, and what you can get in with. So John said he's been able to get into Southern State with his printing press. When I first proposed it to Chittenden Regional, it was denied for security reasons. There's not a consistent set of policies and procedures and structures. It's really dependent on the facility itself and the security officers that run that facility. So John has been in to talk about the exhibit with the women, but we were not able to make printed art. However, he brought a lot of prints with him, and the women love receiving his prints. He sends 2 prints each month and they nominate who should receive the prints. This wedding dress is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibit because a mother and daughter are incarcerated together. And while the daughter is incarcerated, she wanted to get married. And one of the things that mothers and daughters do when your daughter's getting married is you go looking for the wedding dress. But when your mother is incarcerated with you, you can't go shopping for a wedding dress. So what is a mom to do? She made the wedding dress for her daughter. Unfortunately, her daughter was not allowed to wear the wedding dress at the ceremony. Because of regulations, she had to wear her uniform. But that wedding was just as incredible as mine. I can remember her mother and I standing on the side, and tears are running down her face. And even though they didn't have a cake, they had a granola bar that the husband and wife broke in half and fed each other. They just have these creative ways of creating normalcy for them in such an inhumane place. And it's those glimpses of humanity that reminds them this isn't forever. This is a moment in time that I will make it through. It builds the resilience. It shows them they have value. Sloth is my spirit animal because they always have a smile on their face. And yesterday was International Sloth Day. And I received these from one of the women who gave them to my coworker. And I will hold these so dear because some of the yarn, this feather yarn, is not normally permitted. It's normally just basic acrylic yarn. So I don't know how it got in. I don't want to know how it got out, but I am so grateful to receive them. The women produce art as gifts. They produce art as building up each other. When I look around the room and I see all the different art, and some of the women are no longer with us, some of the women are released, and I'm still connected with them, and they are starting their lives that they never even imagined When the women come to the Career Resource and Reentry Center at Chittenden Regional Correctional Center, I was very intentful on choosing bright colors. The walls are purple in the room. There's a different energy from out in the hall in our space. And there are women who just come in and sit. They just want that moment of peace. I hand them paper to start doodling with. I might bring out a book. I might pull up a video. Whatever is going to get the woman out of her head and into her heart. And that's what art does. Art gets you out of your head and into your heart. Art is such a somatic experience because not only are you getting your feelings out, but then there's something productive. You have this creation that's after. And when I think about all the things that these women create, and this is only a sample, I am just astounded. I'm not an artist, so I am just amazed by the talent that is locked away in our carceral facilities. And if I hadn't had the privilege of working with them, I never would have known it. And that's why I think it's so important to bring this exhibit around, because a lot of folks don't have the understanding of what happens in our correctional facilities. Even if you have the mentality, you do the crime, you do the time's not fair. Because of the collateral damage of the family members and the communities that miss out on those folks while they're incarcerated. We all have a chance to contribute to community, and when folks are sentenced to incarceration, that removes them from our communities. And that's why we need to change the system. We need to have more meaningful social purpose corrections in our communities, where folks feel like they belong in community, and if they need assistance or need resources, they know who to go to. And they won't make those dysfunctional decisions that often land them in prison. I know from my own experience when I was out of state, my addiction brought me in conflict with law. But I never imagined the amount of help that was out there for my addiction. Had I known that, I would have made different choices. Had I known the road to recovery, it wouldn't have had to be 30 days in jail. We need a different road to rehabilitation. A correctional facility is not that road. And it's a shame that in Vermont, the women aren't able to be named, and we have to use initials. It's a shame that we're not able to use the technology for women to come out better than they went in. Like John said, I've been on a Zoom meeting with someone in the main correctional facility from his cell. It boggles my mind. I read an article of this other person who received their degree in IT security, and he has a remote job from his cell. Not only that, the company he works for, although they run background checks, they only do it for the past 7 years. And because he's been incarcerated for 10 years, he has the cleanest record of all the staff at this company, even though he's incarcerated. So we need to change things in Vermont, and it needs to happen with legislation. There's one thing that I've learned through this process is Department of Corrections can't do it all by themselves. They need supportive legislation. They need the other departments and agency of human services to contribute to the system and the healing and the services. And I really feel that our legislatures are not going to make those changes until they hear from us.
That's what happened.
So I just wanted to, I hope this inspires you to reach out to your legislatures and to say, let's have some legislation where more people, more artists can go into our facilities and run programming and do art with the folks in our carceral settings. Let's have legislation where folks can come out during the day, contribute to community, or take classes, or go to vocational training nearing the end of their sentence. So when they are released, they have a job, they have housing, they have the things they need to be successful. I think of my own journey to adulthood, and I always knew that if I couldn't pay a bill, I could run to my parents would help me out. If all of a sudden I didn't have a place to stay, I could go stay at home. And it took, some trials and tribulations. Adulting is hard. But the expectation when someone gets released from incarceration is that you start adulting immediately. But however long their sentence is, they've had no contact. I worked with a woman, she was incarcerated 16 years. She never had a smartphone. Within 2 weeks, she's sending me gifts and memes and emojis. I couldn't believe it. If we could get those items inside and show them how to use them before they're released, they would have a much smoother reintegration. I say there's a big difference between reentry and reintegration. And until someone feels reintegrated, they can't thrive. And making art helps these women thrive. And we have to do more, all of us. I want to pass this back to John. No?
You're fun.
I want to know if there are any questions out there.
You've always been on the list. I didn't get about halfway down. Okay, something. So, what about this?
I was wondering about the supplies, the art supplies. How is that funded? Or where do they come from?
Well, there is a rec fund for each facility that is supported by the profits from commissary. So the contract Department of Corrections has with the commissary company is that the profits that are made don't go to Department of Corrections, it goes into this rec fund. However, the rec assistant salary also comes out of that fund. It supports gym equipment, it supports, if there's a barbecue held, it supports that. So it doesn't all go to art supplies. Most of those are brought in through donations. I know that contractors, we receive funding, grant funding and philanthropic funding that supports bringing in art supplies. At Vermont Works for Women, we put together every year for Mother's Day a gift bag. And we always like to make sure there's art supplies in there as well as some self-care items and things like that.
Because your letterpress was allowed in one facility and not another, did they explain why they didn't allow you in the other, or why you were denied access with your
It was a
equipment?
security issue.
But could they be specific? I mean, what part of it is insecure? Can you,
They set the rules.
without a definition?
They don't have to.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't have to justify.
I still call them a collaborator. We have to view the Department of Corrections as a collaborator when we're talking about coming into their facility and creating artwork or providing programs.
Yes,
You need to hear that in. I'll tell you an interesting, it's a conundrum. So those 8 cards that are on that blue mat, cards that the men were putting into the coffee shop for the other use of the other inmates. On their own, they said, so you're a retail person, you do prints and you sell them and things like that. What if we were to give these cards to you? Well, there's the first, that would be the first mistake. They can't give me anything. I can't give them anything as a gift. They can't give me anything as a gift. It's a department regulation. I can end my ability to be a volunteer. They set the rules. We go by them. So the men said, if you were to sell these cards and raise money for that, could that money come back to the facility, to the rec fund, to purchase either additional recreational equipment that's broken or repair it? And they wanted to have that happen. And I said, well, that's very easy because the press is a nonprofit and no one in the press gets paid. And we donate all the money out that we get in. So this would be very easy to do. But I should check with the Department of Corrections first to make sure that's okay. That's not okay. The perception would be, as I was told, the perception would be that the men that are creating the artwork are receiving something for it, which is also not. They can't be paid for their art. They can't receive any benefit from the art. They weren't going to receive the benefit. It was going back into the recreational fund. I was then told, well, there was no mechanism for that money to go into the recreational fund that way. And if they were to do it for me, well, perhaps some other person would come in and propose another idea, and it would just cause a nightmare of finances. And I thought, well, that's crazy. Because it was going to be an outright donation from the press to the Southern State Correctional Facility Recreational Fund. It still hasn't happened. We've been trying to go back into it and ask again if there's a possibility for that to happen. In other states, artists can get paid for the work that they create in prison. If it's sold, they can get money for it. There's nothing wrong with it at all in that state. In Vermont, nope, can't do it. Other questions? You would have to talk to the Department of Corrections or your legislature, or propose that it be different, and propose that we do some of the very innovative things in Maine. Why is Maine so much different from Vermont in the way that incarcerated people reintegrate? I like that term. I hadn't used that before. I usually would refer to it as returning to your community. And I came up with 3 reasons this happens in Maine that does not happen in Vermont, if I can find it. The incarcerated and the formerly incarcerated in Maine play a lead role in creating opportunities and organizations such as Maine Inside Out. Almost totally run by formerly incarcerated, and they also have incarcerated people on their staff and on their board, and there's currently a play that travels around the entire state called The Broken Clock, which is performed by formerly incarcerated. And also in that program, in that play, they have audio recordings from currently incarcerated that play into this performance. The second is that there's a vision and an implementation by the Maine Department of Corrections. A few years ago, they went to Norway and studied the Norway model of corrections. They brought it back to Maine, and they actually implemented quite a few of those, including the Earned Living Unit, which was built by, not physically built, but determined how it was going to operate by the correctional staff and the inmates. And they no longer use the term inmate in Maine. You're referred to as a resident. Just the change of language. Guards are not called guards, they're staff. And inmates are not called inmates or convicts, they're called residence. Some people take it, they say you shouldn't consider a prison your residence. I can understand that too. Third reason, Rokeby College and Catherine Vestman. Rokeby College, Middlebury College, University. Bennington College has a prison education project. Does anybody know that? Much like the BARD Prison Initiative. That's not right, BPI, BARD Prison. They go into the prisons and they teach courses, and people incarcerated can receive college degrees, master's degrees, even the doctorate. The Bennington College Prison Education Initiative happens not in Vermont, but their faculty and their students travel to Comstock to New York to the Washington Correctional Facility, an hour and 15 minutes away, and they teach college credit courses and college degree courses in New York State, not Vermont State. Rutland is the same distance. Rutland has a prison. The Southern State Correctional Facility is 5 minutes further away than Comstock, New York. They don't teach here. Another conundrum. Ask Heather some more
I
questions.
have a question. What's the I can't say the word, recidivism rate in Maine versus Vermont?
I love this question. Because there's not agreed upon definition of recidivism. So you're comparing apples and oranges oftentimes. Because some states consider recidivism going back to incarceration. And sometimes you go back to incarceration because you violated the conditions of your release. So if your condition of release is to maintain employment and you lose your job, you go back to jail. Even though being unemployed is not a crime. If your condition is to have improved housing and you get kicked out, you can go back, even though being homeless is not technically a crime. So some states, recidivism is defined by going back to incarceration. Some states, recidivism is defined whether you are rearrested or pick up a new charge. Some states, recidivism is that you are sentenced for a new crime. In Vermont, we have a unified system, which means we don't have county jails. So in our facilities, there are pre-sentence people, detainers, so they haven't been to trial yet. And then they are sentenced people who have gone through the court process and have gotten their sentence. And in Vermont, when you are sentenced, you are given a min and a max. When you reach your min date, you are eligible to be released either on furlough or parole, and then serve out the rest of your sentence in community. When you are a detainer, because you haven't gone through the court system, you are not eligible for any of Department of Corrections services. So you don't have a caseworker that is working on your behalf to create a reentry plan for you. You are not eligible for Department of Corrections funded transitional housing as a detainer. And if part of the reason why you are incarcerated as a detainer is because you can't get into treatment, you have no one to advocate for you to get into treatment. And how are you going to make the calls to the treatment center for admissions if you're incarcerated? Because you can only call approved numbers on your PIN sheet. So there is no easy answer about the recidivism rate.
So what's the numbers of people in prison in Vermont, and each prison approximately?
Well, there's approximately 2,000.
This morning at 5:53, there was a head count, as it is every day. You can go online and find out. 2,189 people incarcerated in Vermont, state of 650,000. Approximately 555 of those, well, that sounds like an exact number actually, 555 were detainees. The women's prison right now holds 164 women. That's 40% increase from this time last year. It was 117. Nationwide, there's about 1.5 million people. We spend $80 billion a year nationwide. In Vermont, if you do the math, it's $90,000 a year to house somebody in prison. Some organizations do track and use a consistent number for recidivism. So, and I understand exactly what Heather's saying, because recidivism can be these technical violations. And if you went to some place like the Marshall Report, and I left that on that resource list, and you can read all sorts of really fascinating and tragic stories of people that are incarcerated for the most trivial technical violations back into prison, disrupting their entire life again. Rehabilitation Through the Arts is a program in New York, and they've been in existence for 27 years. They have a $1.4 million budget. They go in and teach art, theater, music, dance, every type of art that they can, visual art, and they can only have so many people within the program. So last year, 2024, it's 375 people in the New York correctional facilities participated in that program. They've tracked that number year after year, and the participants in those programs, when they come out, the recidivism rate is less than 3%. So for 375 people to participate in that program, it was $5,000 a year that nonprofit raises. $5,000. In Vermont, $90,000 a year is spent by taxpayers to house a person in prison. And now, don't take anybody past second grade to figure out that math. That's something that could be corrected in that system. So some people will say the system's broken, and other people will say, no, the system's working exactly the way it was intended. So.
I have another question. How many Vermont prisoners are actually out of state right now?
Less than 10%, and it's all men. And I forgot exactly what that number was this morning when I looked. It was down around 120. And they're in states like Mississippi, and they're mostly in prisons that are not state-run, but corporate-run, for-profit prisons.
How many Vermont prisons are profit run?
They're all state-run.
They're all state.
Yeah, there's
But
6.
they're making a big profit somehow.
There's 5 men's prison, 1 women's prison. The budget is anticipated to go to almost $250 million in 2026. A lot of money that we're paying for this.
Yeah.
If you were to say there was a recidivism rate and say it was 50%, think about if the state of Vermont came in and on Route 7, where we have one of these crazy roundabout things, you know, like the courthouse square, how you get around it, and they came in and decided that needed to be corrected. And taxpayers spent millions of dollars fixing that. And as soon as it was opened up, 50% of the cars ran into each other. They wouldn't keep it open the next day. They would shut that down and say, what's wrong? What are we not doing right with this system? And so, if you did use what's considered a national average, more or less, whether or not it's a technical violation or a serious harm you've committed again, that resulted in you coming back to prison, and 50% of the people that leave return back within 3 years. Why don't we do something about that, like we would on a highway?
What's the average amount of time that a person has labeled detained?
Well, let's find out about it from the women's prison.
That's gotten worse with the court backlogs because of COVID. And it really depends on how serious the charge is. I mean, I've worked with women and they've been detained years. The mother and daughter who are in together, I think they were in 4 years before they had a plea deal.
You say that new rule where they're gonna get the new person in Chittenden County to take care of people who have 5 or more charges against them? I mean, are they people that are detained?
Those usually are not
Okay.
detained. I believe those are more at the low-level retail thefts. Although with the change in legislation on retail thefts, I think we're just gonna keep seeing the detained population go up. But we gotta find a way to bring services. If judges are going to detain folks while they await trial, there has to be a way for us to get services to them while they're incarcerated waiting for their trial. And Department of Corrections, you know, they're trying to stand their ground because they're not sentenced yet. They can't do risk needs assessments on folks who are detained because oftentimes to complete those assessments, you have to take accountability for your crimes. But if you haven't gone through adjudication, your lawyer always says, don't talk to anybody. So our system is really, there are many, many broken pieces. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to, 3 years ago, bring another staff person in so that she could work on that piece of the equation and then I could work on the community side of the equation, because I would do so much work with them inside. We'd have a great reentry plan and the women are so excited, and then sometimes I'd see them 2 weeks later and they were back. And I'd be like, what happened? And they didn't have those connections because all the contracted services with Department of Corrections ends when they walk out the door. Like our contract with Department of Corrections only covers our in-facility programming. We have to go and get funding elsewhere to do our community-based work for justice services. And we focus so much on employment because employment is one of the top predictors of whether someone's going to recidivate or not. Especially if it's meaningful employment with a supportive employer.
So I apologize for asking, which I think might be a naive question, but who runs the zoo? Are these people elected or are they appointed to be the Department of Correction?
The commissioner is appointed by the governor.
So these are they're appointed people, they're not elected.
The commissioner is appointed, but all the other staff are state employees.
Okay.
So when there's a new governor, does a new commissioner comes in? Could.
There may.
Okay. And the commissioner sets the rules? Are there other people setting the rules?
Well, the commissioner makes sure that the policies of Department of Corrections fall within legislation. And so that's one of the reasons why Commissioner Devil resigned, is because he was constantly coming up against legislation. I'll give you a perfect example. They want to build the new facility in Essex and have the secure side and the reentry side. And they want to have the secure facility have 150 beds and the reentry center having 50 beds. And a group of stakeholders are like, how can we get the numbers reversed and have 150 at the reentry center and 50 in the secure? Can't do that without the detainee population. And legislation says all detainees are a medium level of risk, which means they couldn't qualify for the reentry center. Or the legislation around inmates not being able to earn money. I know one of the inmates at Chittenden Regional Correctional Center ran the Vermont City Marathon last year. Inside. She ran it on the treadmill, and the rec coordinator took photos proving she ran her 26.2 miles. Her mom registered her anonymously on the website, and she received her medal and her t-shirt. And so they started a running club, and she submitted a proposal because she wanted to do a fundraiser. But the perception of inmates earning money, the superintendent denied it.
I know it was mentioned earlier that there wasn't much knowledge about the Guantanamo Bay work, but I'm curious as to why maybe the names of the artists are not listed alongside the work. Do you by chance know why?
Repeat the question, please. Yes.
So she's wondering why the artists from Guantanamo Bay, why the names are not listed. And I don't know that. I know for the work from Vermont, Department of Corrections would only give us permission using their initials.
From what I understand, they went through the attorney, and the attorney didn't give a checklist to Middlebury College. So they are signed as they are signed, but we're not sure if those are actually the names of them.
So the installation team did not do a bad job,
Correct. They did great.
because I wondered that also, and then it would pass. So.
I have an idea for you. Find a filmmaker who would come and make a film of your attempt at art and your art classes. Get it produced, show it to a film festival group, and it could become like what we saw last year at the Middlebury Film Festival called the Quilters. That was a group of men incarcerated in, I forget where.
Oh, Missouri.
Okay, very successful. It was a proud moment for them to have that film made of them. And it seems like that's the kind of exposure you need to correct a problem.
I'll talk to my agent.
Okay, good.
Next,
I'll find you one.
next this Friday, 3 o'clock.
Yes, this Friday at 3 o'clock.
Oh, you want to just repeat that to me? We could do that. Beyond Bars, film made in Vermont. And I'll read you from the conversations from the Open Road, the organization that spearheaded this, along with some UVM students, Brooke McKean in fact. The filmmakers spent a year talking with folks on the front lines of the struggle we are witnessing on our streets, in patches of woods, and our vestibules. We wanted to understand the roots of this struggle rather than just emotionally react to what we are seeing and hearing. The film is first and foremost about how we might see each other as neighbors and not as problems to be solved. So this is with interviews and various people running and participating in social service areas of Vermont, dealing with issues that will often, when not dealt with correctly or well, ends up with somebody incarcerated. Now, the highlight of this film, which I've seen now 4 times, is the last 20 minutes, where the filmmakers went into the correctional facility in Chittenden, the women's facility, and on camera allowed 4 of the women to speak very candidly about their lives, their incarceration, their hopes for the future. And arbitrarily, they were allowed to use their full names. So on the screen, you can actually see who this person is, identified by their first and last name. Their artwork can only be identified by their initials. How interesting. But I would suggest coming to that film.
What is the name of the film?
Beyond Bars, it's 3 o'clock, Friday, here.
Here?
Mhm. The following week, on the 31st, we have Nikki Morris coming back to Weybridge. That's where she grew up. That's where I met her as a middle school, maybe high school student when I had a bookshop in Middlebury long ago. And she's now a professor at the University of Maryland. But over time, 10 years ago or so, she was in Florida, and she ended up working with an organization called CHIP, which was an advocacy group with people that incarcerated at the Broward County Jail in Florida. And she got to know a lot of the men and women there. Some of them were musicians. She had an idea, along with some other people, to produce a record album that was released this past June called Bending the Bars. And we're going to try a first time ever listening party with that album. It's both video and audio. Well-produced album by an organization called Freer Records in New York. So it's a fairly well-known record label that deals only with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated musicians. And then on the 7th is a film called 26.2 to Life. And the 26.2 refers to a marathon. And this was a group of men in the San Quentin prison who a few years ago had a running club and said, oh, we run around the track all day long. Wouldn't it be great to participate in a marathon? Could we set up a course? So they got permission to have a running coach come in, and they set up a course within San Quentin, inside the prison, both inside buildings and outside, to make the equivalent of 26.2 miles. And then this was documented, and I've seen the trailer of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. And then on the 14th is Paint Me a Road Out of Here, which is the story of Faith Ringgold, well-known artist, muralist, author, died last year. She created a mural in the Rikers Island prison, which at that time in the 1970s was called the Women's House. The women asked her to come in and create a mural for them. And she said, well, I'm not going to do it for you, you're going to do it with me. What do you want this mural to look like? So she engaged them in the process of this design, and I won't spoil it for you. It's an absolutely fabulous movie. It should be winning awards. There's a sub-story at the same time in this that tracks the story about the mural with a woman's life, incarcerated, coming out of prison, trying to get a commutation, trying to get her life put back together. At the same time, they're tracking the story about what happened with that mural, because it disappeared for a long period of time. So it's a pretty intriguing film, and I would really recommend. We showed it once before at the Sheldon Museum when the exhibit was there, and it was standing room only. So we have a waiting list. We have people that are going to want to come to this, and it's only being shown right now in film festivals and special screenings like we set up with filmmakers, and there'll be a print involved with that also. So we were trying to engage people in other areas of art, film, in particular music. Yes?
Will you put these dates and the names of the films in the Addy Indy so we can...
It's supposed to be going in, yes.
Good.
And that was the college. I'll make sure that happens. I'm sure it is. And I know I appreciate these other questions that came about that had no relevancy to the art per se, but the men and women, as Nicole Fleetwood said, their art is a political act. They're actually asking us to take on some of that. If their art speaks to us, then maybe we need to speak to somebody about that and some of the challenges they're facing, and some of the challenges that volunteers that are going into the prisons are trying to face, whether or not we can get in from day to day to work with these artists.
Where is Bernie Sanders in all of this?
He'll be there.
Washington.
There is a program in Vermont with CCV, Community College, that teaches classes in the facilities. $4 million was dropped into the lap of, I was going to say Bernie Sanders, but into the state of Vermont, and the senator was responsible for getting that money into the state, which then allocated that money to the CCV to teach courses to people in the prisons. There's no internet also in the prisons, making teaching hard, and also researching for somebody that's in a prison setting if they don't have access to a computer and you can't get online to do research or to type up your papers. It makes it a lot more challenging. One of the provisions of this $4 million that went to the CCV to teach the courses to people incarcerated was that that money was also allocated for free tuition to the correctional staff and the correctional staff's family members. Now that $4 million, and I did some of the math, what's an average course cost for CCV, and you start dividing that out by $4 million, and it runs out pretty quickly. And where will that next $4 million come to? I don't know if that was a provision with Senator Sanders and the federal funds that came to the state. So, but those courses are CCV courses, and they're the men and women. I know some of the men in particular that sign up for those courses, they'll sign up for anything.
Yeah.
Whatever they're on welding, they'll sign up for welding. Poetry, I want to sign up for poetry, I want to learn about poetry. And art, I come in and I get to make paper. Never thought that. One of the men said, "This is the best day of my life." And he was making paper with me. Anybody wants to volunteer in a prison? They have some expertise. Former teachers, a lot of former teachers go into prisons, teach literature, English, poetry. Art teachers go in and teach, volunteer. We can help you navigate. It's not too hard, actually.
There's 2 women that come into CRCF every week and play pickleball, and that is a huge hit. So you don't have to have something to teach to be a volunteer. They just really appreciate anyone from community coming in and spending time with them and seeing them as people. They just want to be recognized as people.
Where are your prisons? Where?
So there's 6 total throughout the state. The women's facility is in South Burlington, male facility in Rutland, Springfield, Newport, St. Johnsbury, and then St. Albans.
I think we're going to get thrown off the stage.
Yes, I think that's our time.
I know some people are going to rush home.
I'm quite happy to keep it going, but it seems like we're reaching the end.
This card was partially produced at the Southern State Correctional Facility. I set the type up. This is a smaller version. This is a smaller version of the larger print that's over there by the door. And the men, this is part of the coffee card system. So I can't offer them by donation because I can't do anything with the money. I can't give it to this where they would like it to be, which is their facility. The Department of Corrections said, well, you can't do that. Maybe They would get some. So I can get these away. So the men printed the text on the other press that I normally bring in, but they left the blank so people could print the pocket watch that went with the print. So if anybody would like one of these, just come right up to the print press.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you both. We have an honorary membership in AAUW. I'll need your addresses. And thank everyone. I forgot, I was very remiss in saying that Ilsley Library is also sponsoring this series of speakers. And
Thank you, Chris.
and thank you all for coming, and keep staying with our program. If you didn't sign in on an AAUW sheet, but signed in the book, if you would sign in on the other sheet, that would be wonderful. We will try to copy the book and see if we get good enough pictures to be able to read it. But thank you all very much, and thank you both very much.